In this video, I'm going to assume you have a college education and have been trained to think logically and rationally about the world we live in. I am also going to assume college has trained you to problem solve and objectively investigate evidence from a difficult situation. If you're an educated person, I'd like to talk to you today about 10 interesting, cleverly designed questions that use misinformation taken out of context and false presumptions without any effort to objectively research the facts. Here's an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. As a Christian, you believe in the power of prayer. Some doctors and many Christians believe that God is healing people. In reality, can you really prove God did the healing? The only way is if God revealed himself in all his glory. If he did, then Jesus died for nothing and God's gift of free choice is destroyed. You would have no other choice but to believe in God. For Christians, it is a matter of faith and recognizing God in situations because it is in line with his word. The atheist does not believe because he is convinced there is a rational or scientific explanation for it. So, question 1. Why won't God heal amputees? Does it really make sense that an amputee would actually pray for their limb to regenerate? Why would a rational person think to pray for their limb to regenerate when there are no documented cases? They are more likely to pray for God to get them through their ordeal, and I believe God answers those prayers for those who earnestly seek him. Taking the premise in question literally, assume someone believes God can perform healing miracles. If they believe God has healed someone with cancer but observes he doesn't heal someone's amputated limb, does that mean prayer is useless? After all, they believe God healed the person with cancer. If you believe that, then you must believe he exists. Now it becomes a question of God's nature, and you can learn all about him if you objectively study the Bible and learn that God heals in many ways. Imagine tomorrow that God does cause an amputee's limb to regenerate. This could cause an atheist investing all their energy in the idea that God can prove himself by healing an amputee to have a crisis of belief. As an intelligent atheist, you would have to deal with it because based on past experience, it makes no sense. In order to believe it, notice that the atheist would have to create some kind of rationalization. You would have to invent some excuse on your behalf to explain this strange miracle. So you invent your excuse, whatever it is, and then you stop thinking about it because it is uncomfortable. If atheists are convinced that God is imaginary, prayer is useless, and those who pray are delusional, then any miracle that God performs means nothing because one will always come up with another challenge for God. God would have to perform endless miracles to unsatisfiable atheists unless they are willing to open their minds and hearts and objectively examine the evidence as the Bible begs. Question 2. Why are there so many starving people in our world? If you study the Bible, you learn that God hears all prayers and you find no proof there or anywhere that God ignores the prayers of starving people. Look at the astronomical income of celebrities all the way to the common minimum wage worker. If everyone in the world with an income gave just 75 cents per day to those who are starving, there would be no more world hunger. But that doesn't fit in most people's budget because, after all, how can one live without their big screen TV, satellite, and all the channels? We sit comfortably on the couch channel surfing, munching on our $1 value meal as we come across that commercial with all the starving kids on it. Oh man, starving kids. Poor things, you say as you reach for another fry. Aren't the Lakers playing tonight? So you quickly change the channel because who needs that guilt trip? Now who is responsible for allowing the problem of starving children in the world? God or humans? Isn't it funny how many people work so hard to take God's name off our money, out of the Pledge of Allegiance, and ultimately push God out of our lives, but then ask how can he allow such horrible things to occur when it is our own fault? Then they demand that if he doesn't do anything about it, he must not exist. Using the critical thinking skills you learned in college, does this make any sense? Let me ask you a question. If I asked you to snap your fingers but you didn't, does that mean you do not exist? Of course not. It just doesn't make any sense. If people united conquering world hunger, an atheist could say, look what we did. What if some of the people who helped said they felt they were called by God? The atheist would have to conclude that those people are delusional. But who got harmed? If God were to miraculously remove the problem of starvation by making an abundance of food appear to all the hungry, the atheist would have to come up with some strange excuse to explain why this happened. When the hungry people said, it just appeared, the atheist would have to say something like, those people are delusional. Then you push it out of your mind because it does not fit your view of the world. There will always be another atheist to assert there is a reasonable explanation which excludes God and challenge him to prove his existence by removing some other hardship. Question 3. Why does God demand the death of so many innocent people in the Bible? Look up these verses. Why would a loving God want us to murder over such trivial matters? It is a sign of the times where things like disobedience and virginity are trivial matters. God seems harsh in the Old Testament to establish a moral standard for law-abiding citizens and demonstrate the need for grace, ultimately manifested on the cross. If society became rebellious, falling into chaos, the gospel could be compromised, resulting in failed prophecies of Jesus. Bible critics mistakenly oppose their modern moral system upon that of ancient culture and then judge it. These verses were written 3,000 years ago in a very different time. For any of these laws to be enforced, a careful investigation was conducted, brought before the city elders, and everyone had to be in complete agreement. There is no record where a person was put to death under Deuteronomy 21. The first violation of the Sabbath law is found in Numbers 15:32. This person blatantly tested the law and served as an example to all of Israel for the necessity of obedience. For the sake of time, let's look at one verse, Deuteronomy 22. Back then, a woman's virginity was critical prior to marriage. Sometimes money was paid to the bride's father for this expectation. A man and his family's reputation in the community were at stake if the daughter lied about her virginity. Stoning was advocated to ensure the family's integrity, and only because of the deception of being a virgin. Here's the real problem about the question of these verses. Those laws were from the Old Covenant, and now that Jesus had come, he had brought a new covenant, making the old law no longer necessary because it achieved its purpose. It was first written about in Jeremiah 31:31, and Jesus proclaims it in Luke 22:20. See what happens when these verses are placed into context? Using the critical thinking skills you learned in college, along with some Bible study and research of the history and culture of ancient people, these verses make perfect sense. You can also learn from God that it is always wise to plan ahead to achieve a desired result. Isn't college great? Question 4. Why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? The world created in 6 days. There is research pointing to a much younger Earth which corroborates the Bible because most current dating methods are based on faulty assumptions. And yet, there are theories of unrecorded time gaps in the Bible and arguments that the Hebrew word yom in Genesis represents a great time period. A worldwide flood. There is overwhelming geological and paleontological evidence. There is enough water to flood the entire Earth. Oceanic fossils are found on mountaintops around the world. Fossilization requires rapid burial and is rarely found in modern times. The massive amount, location, and orientation of fossils are good evidence. Jonah inside the fish. There is no conclusive proof. Some marine life can swallow a man whole. Air is always in a whale's stomach, and if whatever is swallowed is still alive, digestive activity won't begin. Jesus verifies this as a historical event in Matthew 12:40-41 and directly compares it with his forthcoming death and resurrection. You would have to come to believe in Jesus and know that he cannot lie. God created Adam from a handful of dust. Science reveals dust is composed of about 20 chemicals all found in the human body and are necessary for life. 1 Corinthians 15:39 and Psalms 103:14 contradict the theory of evolution. Science can see evolution within a given species, but given the hundreds of thousands of fossils in existence, there is no evidence anywhere that any one major group of living things arose from another. No skeletons of frogmen or monkeyfish have ever been found. Not a whole lot of proof here, right? But we see the possibility. Believing the accounts or not bears no proof God doesn't exist. If God can create the universe, such feats are no problem. You could go beyond the critical thinking skills you learned in college to see that these accounts serve a higher purpose, demonstrating God's awesome power, mercy, forgiveness, and love for all people, even those who reject him, the need for faith, and the importance of obedience in serving others. But college sometimes regards such things as trivial matters. Question 5. Why is God such a huge proponent of slavery in the Bible? Look up these verses in the Bible. If you use the critical thinking skills you used in college to look up the definition of proponent, you will find that God is not advocating people to enslave others in these verses. They are rules God gave the people to protect slaves from mistreatment, teach a good work ethic, and for slaves to cultivate a servant's heart which God wants everyone to have. Again, this is what happens when you don't study the history and culture at the time and then apply your modern-day thoughts of slavery to that of ancient times. Back then, people often voluntarily became slaves as a vocation or to work off a debt. Sometimes slaves chose to stay with their masters because they loved them. Slavery is an invention of fallen man. God simply permits it like many other things. God didn't seek to change the cultures of the people, but the people themselves.